Your son has a warrant out for his arrest." Hearing those words, my mind went completely blank. What? Why is my son arrested? What does this mean? Questions bubbled up and disappeared in my head, one after another. Standing frozen in the entranceway, speechless, my mouth opening and closing, the police officer stepped inside. It was clear they were doing this to prevent me from closing the door. Feeling overwhelmed by the three large men, I tried to shut the door quickly, a surge of anxiety washing over me. "Your son is here, isn't he? May we come in and talk for a bit?" "Just a moment, please." I tried to stop the officer from entering, bracing against his chest, putting all my strength into my legs to keep them out. Sorry, I really don't understand what's going on. Could you please explain what happened?" I appealed to the officers. The officer with the warrant folded it up and took a deep breath. "It seems he's run away with some cash. The suspect was seen running towards this house. Someone got a good look at his face, so denial will be difficult." The officer relayed this with a somewhat triumphant expression. "Theft? My son?" While I felt my mind going blank, I managed to listen to the officer's words, and despite losing color in my face, I firmly said, "My child would never do something like that. Absolutely impossible." As I raised my voice in surprise, the officer replied tiredly, "But I was certain my son wouldn't do such a thing. The reason is, my name is a 50-year-old housewife. I live leisurely with my husband and son in a house we built with our savings over many years. We all get along well, leading a happy life right in the middle of bliss. But I was a bit worn out. Things weren't going well lately, and when I was alone, I couldn't stop worrying. I need to do this too," I would find myself saying aloud, busy without even realizing it. "Well, maybe it's okay to do it later." Muttering this, I turned on the TV in the living room as if to escape reality. It's better to take a break at times like this. I was feeling a bit tired physically, trying to convince myself of this. I watched a drama broadcast during the day, but the story didn't sink in, and my thoughts remained cloudy. Suddenly, I caught sight of numerous certificates and trophies at the edge of my vision. They were awarded to my son Oliver for his achievements in soccer. He was truly a son to be proud of. As these thoughts drifted through my mind, the doorbell rang. Who could it be? Yes. Turning down the TV, I got up from the sofa. Maybe it's something sent by my mother-in-law. Sometimes she sends vegetables to our house without prior notice, saying she finds detailed communication bothersome, so it might be that. While thinking this, I went to the entrance without being particularly cautious. If only I had checked the intercom camera, then I wouldn't have been so startled. Unfortunately, without any suspicion, I headed straight to the entrance without looking at the monitor. "Yes, I'll open it right away." The moment I opened the front door, I was astonished by the scene before me. "Hello? Is this the residence of the Smith family?" "Yes, it is." "But you're police officers, aren't you? What can I do for you?" There stood 3 police officers at the entrance, just like the ones I often saw in dramas I watched casually. I was truly surprised. Seeing police officers, even when I haven't done anything wrong, makes me nervous and tense, like maybe I've unknowingly caused some trouble somewhere. I was quite tense, gripping the doorknob tightly. Then one of the officers showed me some kind of paper. I couldn't tell what it was at a glance and squinted to see better. Then the officer holding the paper said in a cold voice, "There's a warrant out for your son's arrest." Hearing those words, my mind went completely blank. What? Why my son is going to be arrested? What does it mean? Has he done something wrong? Question after question arose and vanished in my mind as I stood frozen at the entrance, speechless. The officers stepped inside. Clearly they intended not to let me close the door. Overwhelmed by the 3 imposing men, I felt anxious and tried to close the door quickly, but the officers didn't allow it, pressing their feet against the door to keep it open. I was filled with fear. "Your son is here, isn't he? May we come in and talk for a bit?" That if you're not hiding anything, you wouldn't mind letting us in, right? Please wait a moment. I tried to stop the officers from entering, pushing against their chests, bracing my feet to keep them out. Excuse me, I really don't understand what this is all about. Could you please explain what's going on? I appealed to the officers. I truly had no idea. A warrant for what exactly? Then the officer holding the warrant folded it and sighed deeply. Ma'am, there have been a series of thefts in this area recently. According to witnesses, the suspect looks a lot like your son. What? The suspect looks like him? It seems he took off with cash and ran toward this house. There are people who have seen his face clearly, so it will be hard to deny it. The officer spoke triumphantly. Theft? My son? No way. As I realized, my mind was going blank. I somehow managed to listen to the officer standing in front of me. The officer then took out another document and unfolded it. He didn't show it to me, so I couldn't see what was written on it, but he started talking about something that seemed to be related to the contents of the document. It appears you're involved in several theft cases. The total damage amounts to about 500,000 guys. However, considering your son's youth, the victims are willing to settle. He sighed. 500 aksan? No way, my child couldn't have done such a thing. It's absolutely impossible, I exclaimed in shock. The officer, looking teared, responded, I understand how you feel. Every parent says the same thing. You think your son couldn't possibly be involved in theft. Well, we need you to prepare the $500,000, and we'll discuss this further with your son. While looking at the officer's face, I reached for the front door again, deep in thought. Could you please wait outside for a moment? I asked. No, we'll wait inside, he replied. I need to use the bathroom. You can't just barge into a house without permission while the homeowner is in the bathroom, right? Or can't you wait for just 5 minutes while I go? I blurted out words as they came to mind. I needed to calm down. Plus, the physically imposing male officers were really frightening, and more than anything, I wanted to close the door. Please, let me use the bathroom. I'm at my limit. I will listen to everything properly afterward. Ma'am, he began, this is bad. I'm about to have an accident. My words made the officer hesitate for a moment. This was my chance. I quickly closed the front door. Then I heard a loud thud, probably the sound of the officer knocking or kicking the door. Without hesitating, I immediately locked it. The moment the lock clicked, a torrent of emotions flooded over me. Relief, fear, and many questions. Ma'am, please open the door. The officer's voice boomed, accompanied by the sound of him pounding on the door. Worried about bothering the neighbors, I slowly moved away from the entrance. I'll be right back, I said, rushing into the bathroom. I didn't really need to use it, but thought maybe I should. Calm down, I muttered to myself, trying desperately to soothe my nerves. Gradually, my thoughts began to organize themselves. While thinking, I sat on the toilet and grabbed some toilet paper, my hands trembling. It was impossible for Oliver to be involved in a crime. It must be a misunderstanding, I decided. I had nothing to hide. About 5 minutes later, I resolved to return to the front door. After taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and faced the officers again. Excuse me, ma'am, the officer called out loudly. I was chanting to myself that I needed to stay calm no matter what. Your son hasn't tried to escape in the meantime, has he? Please allow us to search the house. He hasn't done anything like that. I'll say it again. My son hasn't committed any theft. It's impossible. In the first place, even if you say that, we can't just take your word for it. There are witness testimonies and camera footage. If you cover for your son, you could also be implicated. Camera. You didn't mention that before, I exclaimed. We mentioned it because it seems you won't admit it. There is evidence. Earlier you said he resembled the suspect, but now you're asserting it's my son. Your story keeps changing, doesn't it? Look, ma'am. I understand it's hard to accept, the officer said, relentlessly pressing on, ignoring my questions. His words lacked consistency, and something felt off. The information kept changing, and something was just not right. Upon closer inspection, the police uniforms even looked like costumes from a drama. I stared intently at the face of the youngest-looking officer. He quickly averted his gaze when he noticed my stare, clearly suspicious. "Ma'am, enough is enough. We're coming in," he said. "Wait. You can't just barge in like that." Seeing my adamant stance, the oldest and largest officer pushed me aside and tried to enter the house. "Stop, don't come in." I tried to push back, but I was no match for the strong man and stumbled, falling on my buttocks. Ignoring me, the officers proceeded further into the house. I hurriedly stood up and followed them. "Don't enter without permission. Don't touch anything." Despite my yelling, the officers ignored me and rifled through drawers in the kitchen and living room. As they rummaged through everything from one end of the room to the other, I felt sick to my stomach. "Stop it. I'm telling you." "Hey!" I rushed to an officer opening a drawer containing mine and my husband's wedding rings, and slammed it shut. The loud bang echoed through the room. "There's nothing here. You can't just enter someone's home and go through their drawers." I glared at one of the officers, shaking with anger. It was the younger officer who had averted his gaze earlier. He nodded slightly at me before heading to another room. Eventually, the three officers focused on Oliver's room. The door had a plate with Oliver's name, so it was clear it was his room. The officers entered without a moment's hesitation. "My son is sleeping in there. Don't go in," I shouted with all my might, but my plea was in vain as the door opened. "We just want to talk." As soon as they entered, they shouted loudly, then suddenly stopped. All three of them were looking toward the bed at the back of the room. "Hello, I've heard the conversation. I'm Oliver." My son lying in bed slowly bowed to the police officers, then spreading his arms and smiling, he said, "As you can see, I'm in this condition right now, so there's no way I could commit theft." The officers, at a loss for words, just stared at him. The bed was a nursing bed with a pressure sore prevention mattress, and beside it stood a wheelchair. Nearby, numerous towels were stacked, and a call button was installed. "My son is bedridden. I'm sorry. It seems we've made a mistake," said one officer who had been speaking in an almost threatening tone. Now, with a rueful smile, my son returned the smile slightly. "That's right, I'm relieved. I can't move my lower body, so it's impossible for me to steal and run away." He pointed at the wheelchair. "I can't even get into that without help. I can't go outside by myself." "I see. That was the case. We apologize for our mistake. We'll take our leave now," the officers said awkwardly, nodding their heads as they started to leave. I, feeling anger towards them, clenched my fists, wanting to say something. However, one officer didn't leave, but instead approached my son. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" replied my son. "What happened to your body, who?" "Steve, is that you?" My son Oliver looked up at the officer with joy in his eyes. I approached the youngest officer, realizing it was Steve, Oliver's childhood friend. "It's Steve!" I exclaimed in surprise, covering my mouth with my hand. Steve had been Oliver's close friend since they were young, playing soccer together. They had shared a passion for soccer since elementary school, practicing together almost every day. They had been very close friends. They had planned to join the soccer club together in middle school, but then Steve had to move away suddenly due to his parents' work, and they lost touch. "I used to watch you excel in soccer thinking you'd go pro after college. I saw you in magazines too, but what happened, Steve?" Couldn't hide his shock. Looking at Steve's incredulous face, Oliver lifted the blanket to reveal his legs, which were immobile. "Actually, I had an accident a month ago, and now my lower body doesn't move at all," Oliver said with a sad smile. Noticing Steve's pained gaze, Oliver quickly hid his legs under the blanket again and turned a genuine smile towards him. "More importantly, it's really been a long time, hasn't it? You became a police officer. But don't you play soccer anymore?" At this question, Steve's expression turned complex. He answered quietly, as if choosing his words carefully. I don't have the talent like you. Besides, I couldn't afford to worry about soccer. Indeed, I remembered Steve's challenging family situation. I recalled hearing about Steve's father, who didn't have a steady job and went out drinking every night. Steve's moving house was not just because of his parents' work, but also due to his father's debts. As Steve spoke with his head down, Oliver sat up halfway and began to speak encouragingly. What do you mean you have no talent? You were always so hard-working. I was envious of you. You never gave up on anything and looked so cool. I could push myself because of you. You're doing your best as a police officer now, right? Seeing you strive gives me strength too. Yeah, I'll do my best. That's right. Next time we meet, let's play soccer together. Where do you live now? I'm in this situation now, but even disabled people can play soccer, you know? Steve kept his head down, his complexion looking pale. Hey, are you okay, Steve? Oliver looked at him worriedly. Then drops fell onto the floor, tears silently streamed down Steve's cheeks as he looked up at Oliver. Hey, are you okay, Steve? Oliver's voice reached out, but Steve seemed barely able to hold back his sobs. At that moment, I noticed the other two police officers quietly pausing behind him. Hey, where are you going? I shot them a sharp look. Reflexively, the two officers, confused or intimidated by my gaze, looked flustered. It seems we were mistaken, and we need to conduct further investigations, so we'll be leaving now. They were trying to leave without a word of apology after barging in and rummaging through the house. Just as I was about to raise my voice to stop them, Steve spoke up. I'm out. He raised his head, tear-stained but resolute, and addressed the two officers. What? What do you mean? Now you were the one who said this house was wealthy. This is wrong, you know it. I'll tell everything to the police. A dispute broke out between the officers right before my eyes. One of them, driven by anger, confronted Steve. Wait a minute, I tried to intervene, but my body wouldn't move with fear, and my voice echoed in vain. The officer's fist swung forcefully toward Steve. A dull thud sounded, and Steve's cheek instantly swelled red from the punch. He staggered and fell to the floor. Another officer kicked him. Then you pay the money, clear your father's debt, one of the burly men demanded. I stood frozen in horror and shock at their brutality. After being repeatedly punched and kicked, Steve was finally released. Despite his pain, he looked up at the officers and declared, I'll turn myself in. I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm not the person you praised anymore. I've always envied you. I have no talent, no wealth, and I hate myself most for using that as an excuse for my terrible actions. Don't joke about turning yourself in, another officer snarled, about to attack Steve again, when a sharp voice stopped everyone. Hold it right there. We all turned to see the source of the voice. A sigh of relief escaped me as I saw a real police officer in official uniform, showing his badge. The fake officers were swiftly apprehended by the real police. Sorry for the delay, are you and your son hurt? No, we're okay somehow, I replied. When I was in the bathroom earlier, I had called the police, reporting that 3 men claiming to be officers were at my house. Their suspicious behavior prompted me to contact the real police. Come quietly, the real officer ordered, as the fakes resisted arrest, but were quickly subdued. Steve, who had been sitting on the floor, was helped up by an officer. He offered no resistance. Steve, Oliver called out. Steve stopped, looked back at us, deeply apologized, and then left with the officer. Oliver watched the parting figure until the end. After many inquiries that day and cleaning up the house, I waited for my husband's return. Despite his busy job and long commute, he hurried back and apologized repeatedly for not being able to contact us sooner. I reassured him that we were safe, and that's what mattered. Later, I learned that Steve was the only one of the 3 who had confessed to the police. They were high school acquaintances involved in frequent thefts in our area. Their scheme was to target wealthy families, falsely accuse their children of theft, and extort money from the panicked parents. The fake arrest warrant was their creation, and the police uniforms were merely costumes. This tactic had worked until this incident was exposed and led to their arrest. Steve initially worked hard to repay his family's debts, but as the interest grew and he couldn't pay it off completely, he reluctantly agreed to participate in this plan. He was told that if he provided information about the area he used to live in, which was a prime target, part of his debt would be reduced. That's why they were so knowledgeable about this town, and perhaps why their crimes hadn't been discovered until now. In the end, everyone was arrested and held accountable. The fact that they tried to deceive people by entering their homes without permission and impersonating police officers led to particularly severe penalties. However, my son wasn't disturbed when he heard this. He decided to turn himself in. "Huh, I knew it. He's essentially a good guy," I said. He kept nodding and smiling as he listened to me. "It's really surprising that they weren't caught earlier, especially with those disguises." "Did you know from the start that they weren't real cops, Oliver?" I asked. Claiming to be a cop with such an untrained physique, Steve used to be much fitter, and I could tell it was a lie right away. Oliver had noticed the details. He later told me that he had felt suspicious about several things, like how he wouldn't meet his eyes and how his voice, though different, reminded him of Steve. "I wonder how long it will be before he can come back," I said. "It's not confirmed yet, but don't worry, he'll bounce back. He can definitely do it. After all, he's still the same guy he used to be." Oliver spoke with certainty. A month later one morning, I brought breakfast to Oliver's room. "Good morning, Oliver," I said. "Morning, Mom. Has it arrived today?" Oliver asked about something else before breakfast. I nodded and handed him a letter in a simple envelope. "You're more concerned about Steve than breakfast, huh?" I remarked. "Yes." The letter Oliver was holding was from Steve. "What does Steve say?" I asked. "He wants to play soccer together. He's been staying active over there," Oliver said. It seemed like a positive letter had arrived. Seeing my son read the letter, I couldn't help but smile. Next to Oliver was a new type of wheelchair designed for playing soccer. Oliver had decided to start training in power chair soccer. He immediately expressed his desire to us to try soccer using a wheelchair and set a goal to play soccer with Steve. His motivation was extraordinary. While watching him, I made up my mind. Even if there are hardships and things don't go well, it's not just me. My always smiling son must also face many difficulties. Seeing him move forward positively is truly wonderful. Inspired by him, I resolved to live my present to the fullest. Today, I felt like I could accomplish anything I set my mind to.